Elon Musk tweeted to the people of Europe yesterday, stating it's time to join the mega movement and make Europe great again. Now, this will seem very appealing to many Europeans, I'm sure. We're in a state of economic stagnation, demoralization, a lack of creativity, and in the UK especially, we're living under a sort of liberal tyranny. Now, I hate to be a party pooper, and I like Elon Musk. He's obviously an innovator and he has that socially awkward Asperger's, which is always good for a bit of fun. But I'm always wary of these attempts to Americanize Europe. Europe, especially Britain, is the source of America, not the other way around. And further, what does he mean by great again? We know what that means in America. It's sort of 80s to 90s business booming, colourblind ethos, flag-waving optimism. Yet if you go back to the 80s and 90s in Europe, we were just part of the American empire anyway. So I'm just not sure that MAGA-style energy, free markets, free movement, libertarian values will really make Europe great again at all. That's why I'm always a little bit wary of these sort of centre-right, go-getter, capitalist-style arguments you get on YouTube. I know they're very popular. I saw one with Chris Williamson and Konstantin Kisin where they were talking about America and how it's awesome because everyone's a go-getter. They believe that they can achieve things. They also seem to state there's a can-do attitude over there where they're supported in their goals and dreams. And yeah, in one sense I can really respect that, that's cool. But that's America to me. That's not the European way. When we speak about Europeans in that terminology, it makes me feel like we're trying to make a J.R.R. Tolkien a sort of David Hasselhoff figure. Personally, I don't want to see Tolkien Baywatchified. I think the magic of Europe is in the woods, in the mythos, in the soul, in the tradition, in the people. Now, I think this is why MAGA works in the USA specifically, but can't really work in Europe. It's because the USA lends itself to what Kemi Badenoch stupidly calls a project. Here is that voice of the people, Kemi, stating, in 2017, I said Brexit was the greatest ever vote of confidence in the project of the United Kingdom. Now, such a statement is so crass, so out of touch with what Britain really is, so typical of the modern globalist corporate Tory party that even Lib Dem MPs were taking Kemi Badenoch to task on this. Yet, quote, leaders like Kemi Badenoch are the end result of the Thatcher-Blairite effect. Thatcher opening up to the globalist markets and Blair very much opening up to the liberal, social and cultural globalist line. And what you end up with is Keir Starmer on one side, an avowed globalist with absolutely no connection to his own people. In fact, he seems to actively despise them. And on the other side, an opportunistic stowaway of globalism, a Nigerian by birth, somebody who by a very nature has no understanding of what Britain means to British people. Now, I know that will be called hateful by liberals, but what other conclusion are you supposed to draw when someone calls your homeland a project? I don't blame Kemi Badenoch for thinking like this. I expect her to think like that. She doesn't have her ancestors here going back thousands of years, men and women who toiled the land, whose blood has nourished the very soil. Now, as we know, the liberal system does everything it can to make such language appear impolite, uninclusive, even racist. And of course, I'm not saying this because I want to be mean to anybody else, because I hate anybody else. It's just because it's a fact of life. And I think it's an extremely iniquitous act to divorce a people from their own homeland, from their own culture, from their own tradition, from their own people, and render their country a simple economic zone, a simple project. Now, this is also why I don't like the MEGA acronym. It sounds too American, it sounds too corporate. I know Elon Musk isn't trying to divorce us of our own history in the way that Kemi Badenoch is unknowingly or knowingly doing. The way that we, quote, make Europe great again, or to put it in European language, awaken another renaissance, isn't by introducing economic models or new political ideologies. It's by invigorating and inspiring the European people themselves. After all, it was the European people that built the European continent. Europeans seem almost frightened to say that the creation of the modern world and the luxuries we enjoy today began here, especially in Britain, France, Germany and Italy. Now, I think there are two reasons as to why Europeans are so averse to blowing their own trumpet in this regard. The first would be, obviously, that we have endless liberal rhetoric telling us that we're evil people, we oppress the world, and other peoples of the world would have done everything we did if only we weren't there, and probably 10 times better and 10 times faster. Of course, that's not exactly historically accurate, but it works enough to shut most people up. However, I think there's also something peculiarly European in our unwillingness to talk of our own achievements, and that's because it's quite American to be braggadocious, to be confident, to say, look at what we've done, aren't we number one? And there's a beauty in that where I think we can find real reawakening and revitalization outside of any mega paradigm into the future. After all, while it's clear that Europeans in both Europe and later America effectively created and invented the modern world, we also have to ask, at what cost did that come? And I think that's where Europe really comes into its own, because looking back to European tradition allows us to look at our material success and see, well, is it this that led to this cultural pluralism, this sort of hedonistic licentiousness that started to destroy us, this American perception of success as materialistic and being the best and being number one, rather than being part of a more cohesive and wholesome tradition which holds us all together. Now, a legitimate comeback here would be, well, that sounds great, but you need to adhere to the harsh realities of life. You need to be capable, you need to be strong, you need to be powerful to deal with the inevitable conflict that comes with the world. Now, I think that is true, and I think our tradition would speak to that. Christ's teaching that to render to Caesar what is Caesar's and God's what is God's, i.e. the material realm has its own laws and the divine realm has that too. Man is, if you like, part divine and transcendental and part material and fallen. And I think the key point here is if we hold to our tradition, we can make sure we don't get taken over by that material realm, as seemed to have happened in America. After all, you could ask now, is America really in control? Yes, it's incredibly powerful, but are the people in control? I mean, does anybody really trust the financial system in America and the elites therein? Does anybody really trust the government of the USA and the deep state? Does America really control its own foreign policy? Is it in the interests of actual Americans? Do people trust Hollywood? Do people trust the massive porn industry pumping out filth to the whole world now? Finally, and perhaps most pressingly, while America was a, quote, European project, especially a British one, that's not going to be the case for much longer. In the next decade or two, we will see European Americans become a minority in America. At that time, will the foundations that allow MAGA to thrive right now be able to hold? Of course, a liberal would say, of course they will, you stupid bigot. Diversity is our strength. America's only going to get better and better. However, if you're more conservative leaning or have traditionalist sympathies, you may well not be quite so sure about the future of the States. At that point, the soul of Europe really will come into its own, which is why I'm very passionate about not selling it out. For Europe to thrive, we must take off the manacles of shame that have been put on the European people. It's perfectly ethical for a European to say that they wish for Europe to maintain its European identity, for the Europeans to remain a majority in Europe, for us to remain and stick to our historic traditions. It seems to me we're frightened of saying this because we've been taught that it's hateful to believe so, but if we switched out European for African or Asian, nobody would have a problem at all. We'd all think it's perfectly normal and perfectly ethical. And that's because it is perfectly normal and perfectly ethical. You can love your own tradition, love your own people, love your own culture, and love other people's cultures and traditions, learn from them, have cultural and economic exchange, and so on. I'd say this is a far more authentic, ethical, and noble vision for humanity than what we have at the moment. Remember, all of this tolerance and inclusion is just a front for the globalist economic system to control absolutely everything. Now, there are many useful idiots, people with blue hair and people who've been wound up by the system that have bought into this, but as things crumble in the Western world, more and more people are starting to see the logic of what I'm talking to. Now, as I often say, this process begins with us and our own spiritual and personal rebirth. That's what I'm building on the Substack link down below. Over the year, I'm really intending to have a lot of stuff coming out, events, groups, workshops, all sorts of stuff you can read and imbibe. Do check that out and join down below if you're interested. Other than that, do let me know your thoughts and do consider subscribing to the channel if you're new.